What if a child could be born, carrying another life inside her? What if, from the moment she first cried, another faint heartbeat echoed within the same fragile body? In the year 1867, on the raw frontier of Texas, a midwife delivered a girl whose existence defied reason. Her note, the only testimony she dared leave behind, contained just 4 words: 2 hearts, 1 cradle. This was Clara M., a child who would never appear in baptismal records, who would be omitted from census ledgers, and who would grow beneath the weight of silence. Witnesses spoke of her abdomen shifting unnaturally, of faint double cries that seemed to rise in unison. By adolescence, her swelling form made neighbors whisper of impossible pregnancy, though she had never been touched. And in the most chilling accounts, multiple witnesses claimed to hear it themselves. 2 rhythms beating out of time with each other inside a single body. Tonight, we reopen this forgotten case, not as doctors nor priests, but as investigators of the past. Through fragments of testimony, through silence in the records, and through the lingering traces of folklore, we ask, was Clara carrying a parasitic twin, or something far stranger, a life the world refused to acknowledge? Before we begin, welcome to Gothic Ledger. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from and what time of night or day you've joined us. And if you haven't already, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Every week we bring you stories drawn from history's darkest margins, where memory falters and where silence conceals more than it reveals. This is the story of Clara M., the girl born pregnant with her sister. 2 hearts, 1 cradle. That single line survives from the night of Clara M.'s birth in 1867, scrawled in the uncertain hand of a frontier midwife. It is neither medical record nor formal testimony, only a note folded into the back of a family Bible, later found when the pages had already browned with age. Yet it is the beginning, and perhaps the only beginning, of a story no physician, priest, or kin would willingly claim. The house stood on the edge of Red Creek. A rough wooden structure built after the war had stripped the settlement of men and left women and children to endure in silence. The midwife, called in haste, found not the cries of many gathered, but a room thick with secrecy. Windows were shuttered. A lamp burned low. The family offered few words, only gestures, as though language itself might bear witness. Clara's arrival was unremarkable in the way of infants, a fragile body slick with blood, gasping for air. Yet, as the midwife washed and swaddled the child, she paused. Beneath the infant's ribs, faint and insistent, was a rhythm that did not match the newborn's own. One beat fast and frantic, the other slow and stubborn, as though 2 instruments were playing out of time within a single frame. The midwife pressed her ear closer, her hands trembling against the soft flesh, and knew with cold certainty that she was hearing more than one pulse. She recorded nothing in the parish log. She told no doctor, no priest. Her only act was that cryptic phrase, 2 hearts, 1 cradle, written quickly before dawn. The family, seeing her shaken, warned her into silence. Payment was pressed into her hand. The door was barred as soon as she stepped away. What occurred inside was sealed as firmly as the shutters that hid the birth. The impossibility of it gnawed at her in the weeks that followed. She had delivered children marked by rickets, by fever, by deformity. She had heard cries too weak to last a night, but never before had she felt 2 pulses within one body. To speak of it would mean ridicule or worse, accusations of blasphemy in a land where superstition grew stronger than science. To record it would invite inquiry, and so she folded the note into the Bible and turned away. The silence that followed was not absence but weight. Neighbors spoke only of the mother's frailty, not the child. No baptism was performed. No name was offered beyond the family walls. What should have been celebrated as survival in a harsh land was instead concealed, the child's existence smothered in secrecy before she had drawn her first breath. The midwife's note endures as the first fracture in this record. It is the single line that cracks open the question of Clara's existence. Was she one, or was she more than one? The family would never permit the question to be asked. But in that dark room on Red Creek, the midwife swore she heard it. Two rhythms beating against each other, alive within the same child. And from that moment the story of Clara M. would never belong fully to life or death, but to the uneasy silence in between. Some homes are built to keep things in, not out. The house that sheltered Clara stood apart, built where the dry grass leaned heavy against the banks of Red Creek. Its walls were plain boards, cut from pine, and nailed with little care for symmetry. Its roof sagged in places where war years had stolen both men and means. Yet the structure endured, as families in that place were forced to endure, pieced together not for beauty, but for survival. To approach it was to enter silence. The nearest homestead lay 1.5 miles to the east, separated by brittle fields and a line of black oaks. To the west stretched open scrubland, marked only by the faint path of cattle drives. No road touched its door. The house seemed placed deliberately beyond sight, as if chosen for concealment. Travellers rarely passed, and those who did were offered no welcome. The creek itself, shallow and sluggish, curled around the back of the property like a natural moat. In flood, it cut them off entirely, rising high enough to drown the banks, leaving the house an island in mud. Such barriers made neighbours scarce, and visits rarer still. It was an architecture of distance, where geography did the work of secrecy better than walls. Inside, rooms were spare, a single room for eating and gathering, 2 narrow chambers divided by boards, an attic pressed beneath the low roof. The windows were small, set high, as though designed less for light than for observation. The family who lived there, already marked by hardship in the lean years after the war, seemed to accept the house's refusal to welcome outsiders. In its silence, they could hide more than poverty. Neighbours noticed little because little was meant to be noticed. The family came rarely to town, trading only when supplies demanded. The father's face was remembered for its sternness, the mother's for its absence. Of the child Clara there was nothing. It was as though the house had swallowed her, holding her within its frame, offering her no place beyond its threshold. In settlements like these, geography became conspiracy. The distance of miles, the thickness of woods, the infrequency of visits, all worked together to blur details into rumour. A child kept within could easily become a child forgotten. Families understood silence as protection. What was not said could not be judged. What was not shown could not be condemned. Thus the house on Red Creek became both cradle and coffin for truth. Its walls absorbed the cries of a newborn whose life carried its own dissonance. Its distance absorbed suspicion, shielding the family from unwanted eyes. Each plank and beam stood complicit, not in cruelty, but in concealment, shaping a prison of dust and distance. Clara's existence, if known at all, belonged only to the silence between walls and the sound of the creek's low murmur. No record tied her to the settlement, no witness placed her in daylight. The house held her as it held every secret the family wished to bury. What began with a midwife's whispered note now found its fortress in wood and earth. The home itself became a guardian of silence, and in that silence Clara was kept, not lost, but hidden. Her name was not written where it should have been. In the years following Clara's birth, the machinery of record-keeping pressed on as it always had. Ledgers updated, census takers dispatched, baptismal books kept in steady hands by parish clerks. Each line carved permanence out of fragile lives, ensuring that names were remembered even when bodies were not. Yet within those pages, where every other child born in Red Creek appeared, Clara's name was missing. The omission did not happen by chance. In 1870, when federal census men rode into the county, they noted the household near the creek, the parents, their surviving kin, and the hardships endured in the years since the war. But no child named Clara was recorded. No infant girl counted among the breathing. Her existence was already half shadow, half secret, erased by silence before her life had time to stretch into the world. The church ledger offered no correction. Baptisms were the parish's most enduring ritual, marked with care in a book that outlasted families themselves. Infants born to the settlement were carried to the font, names inked in black beneath the steady hand of the priest. But Clara's baptism never occurred. There is no record of holy water upon her brow, no candle lit to signify entry into the congregation. In Faith's archive, as in the government's, she was absent. The absence was not oversight. The parish book shows no gaps, no missing lines. It was choice. To admit her was to invite inquiry. To record her was to fix her in history. To open the possibility that others might ask about the faint beating that had startled the midwife's ear. And so omission became protection. The child lived, but not on paper. Such silences become louder when read beside the noise of others. The neighbours' infants, baptized within weeks of birth, have names that remain legible still. The census pages bear famil. Eyes whole, their children counted whether weak or strong. Against this steady documentation, Clara's absence stands out more sharply than a name scrawled in error. She is not crossed out, not amended, she is not there at all. In rural Texas, to be unrecorded was to be invisible. Without baptism, she was denied a place in the spiritual lineage. Without census entry, she was denied recognition in the state's tally of life. Her existence was confined to walls and whispers, her presence carried only in rumor. Before she could speak, the record had already determined her as unsaid. The ledger, then, became not a place of memory but a tool of erasure. Clara was turned into a ghost by omission, a figure whose life left no inked trace. Even the midwife, who might have insisted, remained silent. The note she left, 2 Hearts, One Cradle, was not found in official documents but hidden in a Bible margin, a private record never meant for public eyes. Thus her story began in absence. Where a name should have been, there was blank space. Where identity should have been marked, there was silence. Clara lived, yet the world of ink and record refused her. And in that refusal, her ghost began to form, not in death, but in the stillborn memory of pages that never carried her name. The cradle seemed to rock from within. The earliest unease surrounding Clara did not arise from fever or frailty, but from motion, strange, unbidden, and inexplicable. Those few who glimpsed her in infancy later recalled moments that seemed to betray a presence beyond her own. It began subtly, with the cradle itself. Neighbours said they saw it shift when no hand touched it, rocking gently as if stirred by some inner force. The family dismissed it as wind, though the room's shutters were sealed tight. The mother, pale and withdrawn, was seen cradling the child against her breast. Witnesses swore they heard not one cry but 2, faint and overlapping, as though another voice echoed beneath Clara's own thin wail. At times the sound was so slight it could have been dismissed as imagination. Yet those who heard it carried the memory with unease, certain that no single infant could produce such discordant harmony. Accounts collected years later described her abdomen with equal strangeness. One neighbour, permitted briefly into the house under the pretense of offering aid, remembered seeing the child's belly shift unnaturally, as though stirred by something pressing outward. The movement was not the spasm of colic, nor the tremor of weakness. It appeared deliberate, like the twitch of a limb trapped within. The neighbour never returned. Even the midwife, who had long kept her silence, could not entirely deny what she witnessed. When pressed in later years, she admitted only this: "There were times I thought she carried another heartbeat, and sometimes it was as if that heartbeat moved." Nothing more. Her words, delivered with caution, only deepened suspicion. The family, intent on secrecy, refused all inquiry. Clara was rarely carried beyond the house, and when she was, she remained swaddled so tightly that little could be seen. Yet even under binding cloth, some claimed I saw her abdomen ripple, small bulges forming and retreating as if something shifted just beneath the skin. Such reports were whispered, never spoken openly in the parish or town, for to speak them was to risk ridicule. In an age when deformities were regarded as both divine curse and medical anomaly, no framework existed to explain such signs. Folklore offered the closest language, tales of unborn twins absorbed, of spirits pressing against the living, of infants carrying burdens from another world. But what was seen in Clara's small form was too physical to be dismissed as superstition, and too unearthly to be claimed by science. Thus, the child became more apparition than girl, not for what she lacked, but for what seemed to dwell inside her. The rocking cradle, the faint double cries, the shifting beneath her ribs, these fragments shaped her reputation before she could even stand. Observers left with the same impression, that Clara's body bore not one life but two, one visible, one hidden. Her earliest months, instead of cementing her presence in the world, only confirmed her otherness. Clara existed as a vessel, her own identity obscured by what stirred inside. And as the years passed, the silence around her deepened, for even the walls that sheltered her could not entirely smother the sound of motion from within. The only witness refused to speak. Among the fragments that survive of Clara's life, none carry more weight than the silence of her mother. She alone had stood through the hours of labour, had seen what the midwife's trembling hands could not hide, and had cradled the infant when the strange rhythm of two pulses unsettled the room. Yet in the years that followed, she never spoke of the birth. Not to neighbours, not to priests, not even, so it seemed, to her own kin. On the frontier, silence was often the strongest currency a family could hold. Words had consequence. They invited scrutiny, judgment, sometimes exile. In a settlement still recovering from war, with whispers of witchcraft and curses lingering in old folklore, to admit such an unnatural birth would have been to condemn the child, and perhaps herself, to suspicion that could never be washed clean. And so the mother's lips closed tightly around the truth, burying it deeper than the grave she would one day occupy. Visitors described her as withdrawn, her face pale against the harsh Texan sun. She came rarely to town, and when she did, her eyes drifted away from familiar questions. She was remembered for keeping her head bowed in church, never lifting her gaze when the priest's voice called for confession. If women asked of her child, she would change the subject or feign deafness. The refusal was deliberate, practiced, a shield fashioned from silence. But silence is not emptiness. It is a burden carried, heavy and suffocating. Some later believed her muteness concealed guilt, not for the child's condition, but for something unspoken within the family line. Old tales of bloodlines touched by deformity, curses said to pass through generations, were common on the frontier. Families clung to superstition where medicine failed them, and so her refusal to speak was taken as acknowledgement of something in her source. Ited something shameful. Others believed her silence was born of dread. To name what she had seen, to admit the sound of two hearts beating in her newborn's chest, was to give it power. In a world where words shaped memory, perhaps she believed her silence could contain the horror, could keep it from spreading, but her silence did not erase suspicion, it only fed it. The absence of her voice left others to fill the void. Neighbors speculated, children whispered, priests debated, but the one person who might have clarified the truth left nothing behind but absence. No diary, no testimony, no confession. Only silence, thick as a wall around the house on Red Creek. In the end, her silence became as much a record as any written line. It marked the story with an emptiness that spoke louder than words. By refusing to speak, she ensured that Clara's life would remain untethered, suspended between rumor and fact, never fully one or the other. And so the mother, more than the midwife or the census-taker, became the first guardian of a mission. Through silence, she concealed not only what she knew, but perhaps what she feared most. That Clara's existence was not accident, but continuation. A curse passed quietly through the blood, left to grow in the cradle, unseen but undeniable. The church was the final arbiter of identity in the frontier settlements of Texas. Names entered into baptismal ledgers held more permanence than census lists, and the act of consecration granted legitimacy to lives otherwise overlooked. Yet Clara's case unsettled the parish not by absence, but by uncertainty. If she was one child, baptism was simple, but if she bore another within her, if a second life stirred where no life should, then the question followed, how many souls were present? This was not idle speculation. Records from the parish council in 1868 suggest hushed conversations, discreet but urgent. One priest, cautious and practical, argued that the infant was malformed, nothing more, that what seemed like a second pulse was mere defect. To baptize her as one was to safeguard her soul and close the matter. Another, older and steeped in scholastic tradition, countered that if two pulses existed, then two beings did also. To baptize one while neglecting the other was to condemn a soul unshriven. And so they argued not over medicine but eternity. The debate was more than theological. It carried implications of legitimacy and scandal. A child without baptism stood outside the grace of the church. A second, unacknowledged soul was a blight upon the community's conscience. To admit two was to admit monstrosity. To admit one was to risk neglecting the other. Both paths were intolerable, and so the priests did what institutions so often do when faced with anomaly. They delayed. No baptism was recorded. The ledger shows the steady line of infants in those years, each marked with ink, each blessed and named. Between them, Clara should have appeared. Instead, the page is whole, unbroken, but she is not there. Her absence is not a gap, but a deliberate silence. The priests chose neither one nor two, but nothing at all. In later recollections, fragments of their unease remain. One priest spoke of his fear that baptizing the child might sanctify something unnatural, that the church itself might be complicit in giving holy recognition to what was not entirely human. Another confessed that when he thought of her, he heard in memory the description of two cries and could not bring himself to choose which voice to bless. Theological language, usually so precise, faltered in the face of Clara's existence. Terms like ensoulment and individual essence offered no comfort when applied to a child whose body bore two rhythms. For a church built upon order, hierarchy, and classification, her presence represented disorder made flesh. Thus the matter resolved itself not through decision but through neglect. By leaving her name unwritten, by keeping her outside the sacramental order, the parish preserved its books free of contradiction. But in doing so, it condemned Clara to spiritual limbo, neither blessed nor damned, simply unspoken. The silence of the parish echoed the silence of her mother. In both, the same strategy prevailed. Where there is no answer, Let there be no record. Yet the question remained, pressing against the walls of the settlement, like the faint second heartbeat within her chest. One child, or two. In the winter of 1871, a physician passing through the county was summoned quietly to the house on Red Creek. He was a man accustomed to the rough ailments of the frontier: fever, infection, broken bones, the withering of malnutrition. His journals show he kept a steady hand with detail, though always cautious, never straying into speculation. Yet what he recorded of Clara's case departs from his usual tone, the language weighted not with cure but with dread. He examined her in the back room by lantern light. Clara was 4 years old, her frame thin but not wasted, her eyes alert yet hesitant. It was the abdomen that drew his attention, a swell disproportionate to her size, rounded and firm to the touch. The physician placed his hand lightly upon it and felt what he first believed to be a spasm, but then it came again, deliberate, pulsing, as though from an origin separate from the child herself. He wrote of pulsations distinct from the cardiac rhythm of the subject. In plain terms, he believed he was hearing and feeling two hearts. He pressed his ear to her chest, then to her abdomen, counting. The beats did not match. One raced, quick and light, the other slower, deliberate, foreign. He withdrew, unsettled. The physician knew of rare medical anomalies, what scholars in Europe had begun to call fetus in fetu, a parasitic twin enclosed within another body. But knowledge of such cases was fragile, carried across oceans by rumor more than fact. He hesitated to apply the term. In his notes he wrote only, "A second impulse, persistent, not maternal, not digestive, the origin uncertain." When asked by the family what it meant, he offered no answer. He suggested poultices for the swelling, recommended quiet rest, and advised against unskilled interference. His words implied danger, yet gave no guidance. The family, already fearful of outside intrusion, seized Apo in his refusal to name what he had witnessed. His notes survive only in fragments, preserved in the county archive where they were filed years later, alongside other cases of curiosity. They reveal his own reluctance. The condition bears resemblance to no precedent of my direct observation. I cannot ascribe it wholly to deformity, nor wholly to growth. It presents the appearance of a second life carried within, though I am unwilling to endorse such a claim. What he refused to diagnose spoke as loudly as what he recorded. By avoiding certainty, he placed Clara in a category beyond medicine, her existence neither defined nor treated. His visit brought no cure, no relief. Only another testimony added to the chorus of unease. The family closed their doors again, their suspicion of outsiders confirmed. The physician rode on, carrying with him the burden of a case he would never resolve, a note of horror folded into his records, like the midwife's years before. Thus medicine, like faith, failed to contain Clara. Science could only acknowledge what it could not explain. A child who bore within her the rhythm of another, and whose survival defied every category the 19th century had to offer. The settlement of Red Creek was small, its families bound by hardship and distance, its children left to roam the dusty paths and open fields with little guidance beyond survival. In such places cruelty took root easily, sharpened by curiosity and fear. Clara, hidden though she was, became the object of their whispering play, a legend half seen, half invented, yet more real to them than any scripture. It began with nicknames. The girl with two, they called her, the phrase spoken with both fascination and disgust. To some she was the double child, to others the hollow one. Children often invent language where adults will not, their cruelty unsoftened by pity. In the mouths of the young, her condition was transformed from anomaly into spectacle. Few ever saw her directly. Clara's family kept her within the house, swaddled and shadowed. Yet children claimed glimpses. a pale face pressed to a small window, a thin figure hurried across a yard, an odd swelling beneath fabric. From these fragments, stories multiplied. Some said they saw her belly ripple like something crawling inside. Others swore her cries carried an echo, a faint second whimper in the distance. Whether invention or truth, the tales spread faster than fact. Playground games turned her into a monster. Children dared each other to walk past the Red Creek house at dusk, to knock on its shutters and run, to chant her names in mocking rhyme. They spoke of her as if she were both alive and not, human and other, an object of fascination best kept at a distance. These games hardened into folklore, retold around firesides and in fields, until the story of Clara became indistinguishable from ghost tales of headless riders and haunted creeks. Adults, uneasy with such talk, did little to silence it. Some laughed nervously, dismissing the rumors as childish invention. Others, more superstitious, allowed the chemin à to circulate, as though warning their own children away from the family's door. Silence again became complicity. The cruelty did not need truth to survive. Children in their simplicity made Clara into an emblem of all that was strange, forbidden and frightening. Her humanity was eroded by ridicule, her identity reduced to whispers and chants. In their voices she was no longer a girl, but a story, one that grew sharper with every telling. And so Clara lived as both hidden and exposed, concealed within her home, yet laid bare in the imaginations of those outside. Her condition, incomprehensible even to doctors and priests, found its simplest, harshest expression in the mouths of children. Folklore was their weapon, and in its echo, Clara's difference became eternal. What science would not diagnose, what faith would not name, children resolved with laughter and cruelty. She was the girl with two. By the time Clara entered her 13th year, the concealment her family had fought to maintain began to fail. Childhood swaddling could no longer disguise what her growing body revealed. Puberty brought changes expected of any girl on the frontier: height, the softening of features, the awkward lengthening of limbs. But with Clara, these signs were accompanied by another transformation, one far less natural. Her abdomen began to swell. At first, it could have been dismissed as the malnourished distension common among children raised on meagre rations. But the swelling did not subside with food, nor with fasting. It grew, rounding her figure in ways that provoked both alarm and suspicion. By the time she neared 14, whispers had already formed. She looked as though she carried a child. In settlements where virtue was measured as carefully as grain, such appearance condemned her before words were spoken. Neighbors speculated that she had been compromised, that secrecy had concealed not just deformity but sin. Yet those closest knew the impossibility. Clara was never left unattended, never courted, never touched by any man. The family's isolation, once a shield, now served as evidence. If her swelling was not the result of man, then what explanation remained? Accounts from those rare witnesses describe her presence with unease. She did not appear sickly, nor entirely frail. She carried herself quietly, eyes downcast, yet the prominence of her midsection betrayed her, no matter how she dressed. Loose garments could not disguise the unnatural curvature, the sense that something grew within her at a rhythm separate from her own. One neighbor, after catching sight of her in passing, remarked, "She looked expectant, but of what God only knows." The family responded with deeper silence. Clara was kept indoors even more strictly, her rare outings confined to dusk or dawn, when shadows might conceal her form. Her mother avoided the gaze of other women, whose questions sharpened with suspicion. The father's sternness grew harsher, his presence at market brisk, his speech cut short when neighbors lingered too long. Isolation, once voluntary, became a necessity to contain the judgment gathering around them. Yet gossip has no need of proof. The settlement's children, already cruel in their invention, found new fuel for mockery. They chanted that she bore a child of her own inside her, that she was both mother and sister to what pressed beneath her ribs. Their voices, though childish, captured the dread unspoken by adults. To those who watched her from a distance, Clara seemed to embody contradiction, innocent, untouched, yet visibly carrying something. The swelling itself became a grotesque emblem of her adolescence. Where other girls grew into the early signs of womanhood, Clara grew into a form that suggested maternity without origin. Her youth was never permitted to stand on its own. It was forever entangled with what lived, or seemed to live, within her. In this way, her adolescence stained her innocence not by act, but by appearance. The uncaused swelling turned her into a paradox, a virgin who bore, a child who seemed to mother, a body whose growth did not belong entirely to itself. Clara was never granted the chance to be only a girl. She was instead a vessel, her youth overshadowed by the slow, silent expansion of something else. It was in her 15th year that the whispers surrounding Clara gave way to something more tangible, something that could no longer be explained as illusion or rumor. The sound of it was heard by more than one ear, and once heard, it could not be forgotten. A travelling apothecary, called to the house under pretence of offering remedies for fatigue, brought with him a stethoscope, a recent contrivance of European medicine, still novel on the Texan frontier. With cautious detachment he placed its wooden bell against Clara's chest, then her abdomen. His brow furrowed. He shifted the instrument, listening, counting. Finally he removed it and stared long at the girl, as though uncertain whether to speak. He had recorded one rhythm, steady and natural, the beat of a living child. But beneath it, in Clara's abdomen, he had heard another, slower, deliberate, entirely separate. He said little before leaving, but neighbours reported that his hands trembled when he gathered his satchel. His only words, overheard by Clara's father, were plain: "There is more than one." In the weeks that followed, others claimed to hear it without instrument. A neighbour woman, sitting close as Clara rested, swore she felt not one pulse, but two, a strange echo beneath her palm when she touched the girl's midsection. Another insisted that while cradling Clara briefly, she had heard two rhythms beating against each other, out of time, like instruments playing two different songs within the same body. These testimonies were never written formally, yet they endured in oral account, repeated with the same dread as a ghost story. Each witness insisted on the same fact, that Clara carried a heartbeat not her own. The sensation of hearing it was described as uncanny, even nauseating. One neighbour said it was like listening to two clocks in the same room, their ticks never meeting. Another said it was that unlike standing near a drum played faintly in the distance, audible yet belonging to no visible source. For a community already uneasy with her swelling form, the second beat was confirmation of the unspoken. Clara was not merely deformed, nor merely ill. She contained within her something separate, something alive. Folklore rushed to fill the void medicine would not name. Some claimed it was a sister trapped inside her, waiting to emerge. Others whispered it was no sister at all, but a spirit, a borrowed life clinging parasitically to her own. The family's attempts at concealment grew desperate. Clara was kept from sight almost entirely, her presence reduced to shadow within the house. Yet secrecy could not erase memory. For those who had placed their ear to her body and heard the two rhythms, no silence could erase the sound. It was the beat of life within life, two hearts divided by the same flesh, each keeping its own time. To witness it was to glimpse a contradiction that neither science nor faith would claim. Clara was no longer simply the girl with two, she was the girl who carried another's rhythm inside her. And once heard, the echo of that second beat lingered in the mind, impossible, undeniable, and wholly apart. By her 16th year, Clara's strength began to falter. What had once been quiet endurance gave way to sudden weakness, her body betraying her without warning. Neighbors told of her collapsing in the yard, her knees giving way as though struck by an unseen hand. Others recalled seeing her carried back into the house, limp as cloth, her family shielding her from view. The episodes became frequent, irregular, and always accompanied by whispers that unsettled those who listened. Witnesses spoke of a pattern. Before each collapse, Clara's face would pale, her breath shorten, her hand pressing instinctively to her abdomen. Then she would crumple, falling into unconsciousness. When she returned, eyes fluttering open, lips moving faintly, she spoke words that chilled those present. Recollections vary, but several agreed on the phrase most often repeated: "She wants to come out." The voice was faint, sometimes no more than a murmur, but its clarity was undeniable. To hear it was to feel intruding upon a confession not meant for human ears. Whether it was delirium from fainting or the echo of something deeper, no one could decide. Yet the effect was the same. Those who heard her words left with dread, convinced they had brushed against a secret too large to name. Some called it possession. On the frontier, where scripture intermingled with superstition, it was easy to believe that Clara's body sheltered not just a second life, but a spirit unholy, pushing against her flesh in an attempt to escape. Others whispered of madness, that her mind, like her body, was fractured in two. But to those who had already heard the second heartbeat, her murmurs confirmed what they feared, that whatever dwelled inside her sought release. Her family's silence deepened, but their actions betrayed strain. Clara was kept almost entirely indoors, her outings reduced to brief moments at dusk. Her father either refused all offers of help, his refusals edged with anger. Her mother, pale and weary, seemed consumed by vigilance, as though expecting collapse at any moment. The household, once merely private, now appeared besieged by something it could neither confess nor expel. The fainting fits left Clara weakened, but it was her murmurs that shaped her legend. Children who once mocked her with rhymes grew silent when they heard of her words. Neighbors spoke them in hushed tones, repeating them like a curse. "She wants to come out." The phrase took on a life of its own, detached from Clara, whispered around firesides as though warning of something waiting to break free. The collapse of her body became a theatre of dread, each episode a reminder that she was never alone, even within herself. The murmurs blurred the boundary between illness and haunting, leaving those who witnessed them uncertain whether they had seen a girl fainting or had glimpsed the struggle of two beings contending for the same frame. Thus Clara's decline was not measured in years but in moments, sudden, sharp, and terrifying. Her body folded under a weight no one else could see, and her voice delivered words no one wished to hear. Each collapse etched deeper the conviction that she carried within her not just a secret but another will, straining against her flesh. Rumor holds that the family's silence was broken only once, not in confession but in action. By the time Clara's fainting fits became unbearable and her murmured phrases spread beyond their walls, her kin resolved to attempt what no physician would sanction. Whether born of desperation or superstition, the act has never been confirmed, only pieced together from whispers left behind. It was said to have taken place on a late autumn night, when frost pressed against the windows and lantern light flickered unevenly across the bare wooden walls. No doctor was summoned. The memory of the travelling physician's refusal still lingered, and no priest would touch the matter. If Clara carried another life within her, it was a burden her family believed they must confront alone. Neighbors reported seeing faint lamplight long past midnight, moving from room to room. Some swore they heard cries carried on the cold air, muffled quickly by closed shutters. Inside, the family gathered in secrecy, the mother at Clara's side, the father with trembling hands clutching tools not meant for medicine, knives sharpened for farm use, cloth boiled hastily, whiskey poured both for courage and for pain. This was no surgery by training, but an intervention by necessity, a crude imitation of what they had seen only in passing. Accounts differ on what followed. Some said Clara's cries rose, then ceased too suddenly, replaced by a silence heavier than any night had held before. Others claimed a sound, not hers, issued briefly from the room, a thin wail that faded into nothing. Whether this was memory, invention, or truth, no one would ever know. The family never spoke of it. What is certain is that Clara was not seen again with any regularity after that night. When asked, the father answered little, his face stern, his words clipped. The mother withdrew further into isolation, rarely appearing in town. Those who pressed were met with stony silence, as if language itself had been buried alongside something unspoken. The absence of clarity became its own testimony. No grave was marked, no doctor's record filed. Clara's name did not appear among the dead, just as it had never been entered among the living. The intervention left no official trace, only the hollow of rumour, a story repeated in fragments. They tried to cut it out. They tried to let it out. They failed. Or they succeeded. Or both. The image lingers, preserved not in fact, but in speculation. A lantern swaying, shadows thrown large against rough boards, a child on a bed, family hands shaking over her, silence pressing in as tightly as the night itself. Whether Clara lived beyond that moment, or whether what lived within her was ever truly removed, remains unanswered. Some surgeries leave healing, others leave scars. This one, if it happened at all, left neither. It left only silence, deeper and more enduring than the silence that had surrounded Clara from the hour of her birth. After the night of the whispered intervention, Clara's presence in Red Creek shifted from hidden to absent. What had once been a guarded secret now became a silence so complete it resembled erasure. There was no death notice in the county paper, no priest summoned to recite the rites, no burial marker cut into wood or stone. She vanished not by dying, but by being unspoken. The parish registers for those years tell the story best, though not in what they contain, but in what they lack. The priest who once struggled with questions of her baptism never wrote her name in the records of the dead. Page after page, filled with infants and mothers lost in childbirth, closes over her without mention. Her absence is clean, deliberate, as though she had never drawn breath at all. The town ledgers mirror this silence. Census entries taken in the decade following her birth list the household on Red Creek, its occupants numbered, their ages duly noted. But Clara is gone. No faint scratch of her name, no margin note, no correction from neighbours who might have remembered her. Officially, she was never there. Even the graveyard offers no testimony. Families along the creek left markers of wood or stone, rough crosses that have since rotted or tilted with time. Each bore a name or an initial, a claim against oblivion. Yet no cross marked Clara's passing. No corner of the burial ground was whispered as hers. If she was laid to rest, it was in secrecy, her body placed in earth without recognition, without inscription. Among the settlement, tongues that once whispered her strangeness grew still. Neighbours who once spoke of her double cries or swelling form ceased to mention her at all. When asked in later years, older residents hesitated, their memories fragmentary. Some claimed they had imagined her, that she was more rumour than child. Others admitted that they had known her once, but felt pressed to forget. Omission had done its work. Silence had reshaped memory into doubt. The most chilling aspect of Clara's disappearance was the efficiency with which her existence was dismantled. No law was broken, no violence recorded. Instead, she was undone by omission, her story erased line by line until nothing remained but rumor. For institutions built upon record, church, census, graveyard, the decision not to inscribe her name was as final as death itself. And yet absence has its own permanence. Clara became a ghost, not because she lingered, but because she was removed. The void she left behind drew attention more than any inscription could have. Each missing line, each blank space where her name should have been, became an unmarked monument to her erasure. Thus Clara passed into obscurity, not with the closure of death, but with the chill of deliberate forgetting. She was carried not into the graveyard, nor into the parish rolls, but into silence, a silence colder than the earth, sharper than stone, more enduring than any record inked in a book. By the 1920s, the house on Red Creek had long since fallen quiet. The family line had thinned, the property abandoned to dust and weeds. It was during the clearing of that ruin, when descendants sought to reclaim what little could be salvaged, that a chest was found in the attic, wedged beneath the slanted beams where light rarely reached. The trunk was unremarkable at first glance. Plain pine, its iron hinges streaked with rust, its lid swollen by years of humidity. Yet when opened, it exhaled the stale air of decades, and within it lay garments no one expected. Small dresses of hand-sewn cotton, tiny bonnets edged in lace, knitted booties browned with age. Each piece was carefully folded, preserved not in luxury, but in intent. They were the clothes of anticipation, the fabric of preparation for new life. But what unsettled the relatives who lifted the cloth was the doubling. 2 sets of everything. Each dress had its twin, each bonnet its mirror, each pair of booties replicated in exact form. Nothing mismatched, nothing missing. It was not a chest prepared for a single child, but for 2. The discovery cast long shadows backward. For decades, whispers of Clara's condition had lingered at the edges of memory, half-remembered stories dismissed as folklore. Yet here, in cloth and thread, was evidence of expectation, that the family had once prepared for 2 infants, had anticipated 2 lives to swaddle, feed, and present to the world. Only one had ever been seen. The garments were small, suited to newborns, their stitches careful and deliberate. The fabric, though yellowed, bore no wear, as though never placed upon living flesh. They had been stored away before they could serve their purpose, kept hidden like the memory they carried. In that dust-choked attic, the absence of their use became louder than the garments themselves. The relatives who unearthed the chest weighed over its meaning. Some believed it proof of twins, that one had died at birth and been concealed out of shame or sorrow. Others, recalling the rumours of Clara, the swelling, the second beat, wondered if these clothes had been made for a child who had never truly come forth, one who had lived only inside another. The chest was not preserved. Its contents were divided, some garments kept as keepsakes, others discarded as relics of no use. Yet the memory of what it contained survived in testimony, passed into family recollection as a detail too strange to ignore. The chest itself became less an object than a document, a mute witness to expectation and erasure. The doubled clothes, untouched by life, confirmed what no ledger recorded, that there had always been 2 in the family's mind, though the world was allowed to see only 1. Thus, in fabric and thread, the silence of Red Creek was briefly disturbed. The garments whispered a truth long buried, that Clara had never been alone, and that the family in secret had always known. Among the few remnants of the family that once lived by Red Creek, one object carried forward, a diary, bound in worn leather, its ink faded but still legible. It was not the mother's nor the father's, but a cousin's, kept during scattered visits to the household. Most of its entries are ordinary, notes of weather, crop yields, the slow recovery of the land after the war. Yet near its end, in a hand grown uneven, one line appears that eclipses all others. We could hear them both cry. The entry offers no explanation. No names are given, no context supplied. It appears abruptly, set between two mundane remarks about the failing roof of the barn and the scarcity of tobacco. But its weight is undeniable. In those 6 words lies the only direct acknowledgment of what witnesses had long suggested, that Clara's life was never solitary, that within her another presence existed, struggling against silence. No further detail accompanies the line. Was the sound heard at birth, when the midwife first recorded the rhythm of 2? Was it during Clara's fainting fits, when she whispered phrases that seemed not entirely her own? Or was it in the final hours, during the rumoured intervention by lantern light, when cries, one fading, one rising, were said to have been muffled behind shuttered windows? The diary does not say. It leaves only the echo, stripped of explanation, suspended in ambiguity. The absence of graves sharpens the mystery. The family plot at Red Creek holds markers for parents, siblings, cousins, but not for Clara. No stone bears her name, no cross her initials. Equally absent is any sign of another, any marker for a twin or second life. It is as though the ground itself refused to claim what had never been admitted above it. In the parish records, too, silence reigns. The ledger that once excluded her at birth continued to exclude her at death. Nothing was inscribed. Bed, nothing corrected. Clara's life was bounded by absence. No baptism, no burial, only omission. And yet the diary line endures. Like a splinter driven deep into the archive, it resists dismissal because it exists at all. If no such cries had been heard, why commit them to paper? Why risk acknowledgement in ink when silence had protected the family for decades? The phrase suggests that at least once the truth overwhelmed the walls of secrecy. For a fleeting moment, the hidden life within Clara seemed to press outward, audible to more than just herself. The record ends there, the diary closes, the chest of doubled garments is scattered, the house on Red Creek collapses into ruin. What remains is not resolution, but echo, a sound remembered but never explained, a life lived as 2, yet erased as none. And so Clara's story does not conclude with death or discovery, but with suspension. She lingers where history cannot settle, where the faint rhythm of a second heartbeat might still be imagined in the silence of the archive. The family may have buried her in omission, but the line survives, repeating itself like the pulse it describes. We could hear them both cry.